Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this bonus episode of the Hired Geek Podcast, episode number 175, with Daniel Kalef from Green Flower Education. So they're doing great work bringing cannabis education to campus, partnering with universities and colleges across the country to help kind of solidify and create a kind of accepted credential in the space of cannabis education. It is a fast-growing business as more states legalize medical marijuana and recreational marijuana. So just really cool to dig into that really unique and different kind of aspect of higher education in the U.S. right now. So get into Daniel's story and how he got into this work and the way that they kind of navigate the very interesting kind of legal waters right now. So I provided some great resources as well for those who are interested. And as a brief note before the episode starts, the first portion of this, the first couple of minutes, does have, unfortunately, a little background noise on his side, some beeping of a truck that goes by him, which, it is what it is. Can't do too much about that, but still wanted to make sure that we could get this great conversation out to you all. So I do appreciate your patience with that. But without further ado, this is episode number 175, a bonus episode with Daniel Kalef. Our topic for today is the examination of just one of the many booming industries out in the world. How is it impacting higher education? So I think there's a lot of examples of this out there, things like esports or craft beer. But today we'll be focusing on recreational marijuana, how that's become legalized in a lot of states. Certainly, medical marijuana has been available in a lot more states, but certainly this is a very new and growing industry. So higher education is seeking to respond and adapt to the new changing economic climate and everything. So excited to dig into that with our guests today. We'll start out, though, as we always do, have our guests introduce themselves briefly, go over their professional background, and how they got to be where they are today.
Well, thanks. My name is Daniel Kalef. I am the Executive Vice President of Higher Education at Green Flower. My path to getting to cannabis education is a bit long and involved. I actually started out as a practicing attorney many years ago, and moved into a couple industries, including healthcare and other areas of education. And then spent 5 years working for Muhammad Ali, helping him build the Muhammad Ali Center in Louisville, Kentucky, and helping him raise the money for that and the marketing to get it up and running. And after that, I had an opportunity to join some friends who were looking to acquire a company that was creating online courses for some colleges that were starting to dabble. Still was new at the time. And we bought this company and really basically built our own OPM. We didn't really know that really wasn't a thing at the time, but we were writing courses and we were helping students get online and helping instructors learn. And so it was a really great opportunity for us to build. And our niche was, smaller private institutions, nonprofit but small institutions, that company got acquired, and I worked for a couple other OPM companies. If anyone doesn't know, that's online program management, right? So those are the companies that help universities enable them to put their degree programs online. So worked with a couple other of those, and a former boss called me one day and said that he was looking at a company. They had reached out to him, and he maybe for investment and some advice and around higher education and cannabis education. And if they were going to find a way to get into the industry, they were going to need someone to come and kind of help build out the higher ed platform. And he said I should do it. And so full disclosure, I'm not never have been a cannabis consumer. Really wasn't something that I was exposed to, but I went and met the folks out at Green Flower, and the thing that hit me the most is there are very few times in history where you can get involved in an entirely new industry at the ground floor. And if you think about that, it was just something that I don't think I could pass up. And so I also thought it was a great challenge to see if I could convince, the people that I knew in higher education were pretty conservative and universities are pretty conservative. And to me, it was kind of a fun challenge to see if we could come up with something that would be compelling as around cannabis education that major universities would be interested in offering. And so that's how I got to Greenflower.
Yeah, and I think it is interesting that, like you said, I think we're at kind of an inflection point where it is like recognizing that if like very traditional, venerable, conservative institutions that are going to maybe resist any sort of like trendy thing are beginning to acknowledge sort of impact or sort of just like the nature of where because I've seen like programs around like the craft beer industry and like any of those sort of things where it's just like yeah, like they want trained, qualified people, and if higher education could create sort of environments where that is delivered in a sort of uh, really kind of controlled or like sort of measured and have like trained educators or just like creating like just the best learning environments versus it being like anecdotal or sort of done um some other way that doesn't have kind of the same uh quality controls or something. I guess yeah, it's just like an interesting moment for sure where I think we are just kind of really kind of cresting towards that top of and where eventually things are just going to kind of waterfall and cascade from there. But um and yeah, I mean I can certainly can share professional affinity, your background with OPMs is sort of how I came up in ed tech as well. And I think it, certainly given a lot of great kind of foundation and baseline for the space. And I guess, before we get too far though, if you want to just explain a bit about what Greenflower does, because I think it does sort of play around in the space of sort of enabling, institutions as they're developing learning content and everything. So, yeah, if you just want to take it away, explain a bit about what
Yeah.
Greenflower does.
Yeah, so Greenflower actually started over 8 years ago when California went recreationally legal. There was so much misinformation out there. As you can imagine, nowadays in the industry they call that legacy people. So people who are legacy, business owners in cannabis, but that means people who did it when it was illegal.
Hmm.
And so you have this whole new industry, there's regulations now, and there's rules, and there's taxes, and there's all these things, and so the founders of the company really wanted to just try and clear the space and make sure that everybody had credible information. And so they started by doing webinars and events and some live and recorded and maybe a class here or two, and slowly built up a pretty good cadre of, I mean, they have 600 industry experts who have contributed to all of their work and all of the curriculum they built. And so the question was, could we find a way to get into higher education? And I think your point about inflection points, and this was 3 years ago. There were two theories, and that former boss of mine who suggested I come do this had, which was and the industry folks had, which was a we know, and it's an axiom that's been forever, that people tend to, whether it's online or in person, tend to go to a university within a couple hundred miles of their home, right? And so regionality is really important, and especially in an industry where only specific states have are legal, either medically or recreationally. We wanted to find how do you get into the local community and not just be some California website where you go take a class. And the other thing was that if we could convince accredited universities to offer these programs, it would really also go a long way towards changing the stigma in the industry. It's one thing when there's, and there were a couple examples. There's a school out in California called Oaksterdam. It's a for-profit college. It's not really a college. It's just a kind of a place where you can get programs in cannabis. And they were like the first ones that did that. But it was for-profit, and it was, just about cannabis, and it wasn't taken overly seriously. But if you think about what would it look like if Syracuse or the University of Arizona or the University of California school, or were offering programs that could make a big difference. And there were some schools that were doing it. Northern Michigan was the first. Northern Michigan University offered a bachelor's degree in medical plant chemistry. And that was happening 3 years ago when we first started thinking about this. And they couldn't even use the word cannabis when they came up with the program. And then
Mm.
about a year later, University of Maryland started offering a master's degree in a similar discipline. So, and there were a lot of schools that were maybe offering a seminar or a class, about it, but that was about it. And so, our theory was let's see if we can do that. And then one of the things we started to think about was market research. What do people want if they're learning? So the industry folks told us they needed people who really understood every aspect of the business. They understood the cultivation process. They understood. We had doctors and nurses who were saying that there's not enough people in the medical field that understand anything about how this is going to affect people, and so health care and medicine was important. And then with all the regulations and rules and from state to state and nationally, and it's not federally legal, et cetera. We heard that there was a great need for people to really understand kind of the law and policy side of it as well. So, but when we started to do some market research, we knew the areas we wanted to teach, but we didn't know who the students were exactly. And we got a lot of great information saying that most of the people that wanted to get into the cannabis industry or were in a field like law or medicine where they were affected by it weren't people that were looking for a full degree. They had college experience, they had an undergraduate or they had a graduate degree. They were looking to get better, acquainted and more knowledge around it. And so our theory was let's talk to schools, the schools in their departments of continuing and professional education, where they could offer it to people who were, they're typically their audiences, working professionals that are looking for career change or upskilling. They could offer it as non-credit, which would then not scare the school, which was always, universities are always worried about running afoul of the federal government. And so but originally we thought, when we had our folks starting to design the courses, we thought we should overbuild them, if you will, right? Because we're not going to have any credibility and people are going to laugh at us. And so we overbuilt our courses all so that they could be, master's level courses, really, for credit. And we thought if we built in a lot of rigor, we would be in a better position to defend ourselves if the slings and arrows started coming from the traditional folks at the universities. But then we also, you kind of hinted towards an OPM type model. Two other things we realized: no matter how great the curriculum was, and if we could host it, et cetera, no university was going to have subject matter expertise to teach or facilitate the courses. And so that was something we were going to have to help with. And then marketing was going to be a problem because marketing cannabis is hard. You still can't today buy a Google AdWord with the word cannabis in it. And there's a lot of restrictions. You can't have TikTok with the word cannabis. And so we had to figure that out. And we realized we better do that for our schools because they would never have the bandwidth or understanding to navigate that. And so we did, and I'm sure it's because of my background, kind of create a bit of an OPM model, if you will, where we really make it very turnkey for the universities. We do the hosting of the curriculum and the teaching and the marketing and advertising. And we even register the students so that schools don't have to worry about e-commerce when it comes to something related to cannabis. So that's kind of what our theory was, that it would really make a difference if it was at universities for a number of reasons. And we figured out quickly all that we needed to do to help them be successful.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, 'cause it just makes me think where, helping that sort of ease of implementation is always important for like ed tech stuff in general. But like I said, there's just a lot of like kind of, walking on eggshells of something like this for an institution where they, probably want to keep a healthy distance between wherever the line is. But, I'll kind of break this question into two parts is like, so this is kind of a growing industry nationwide that folks are wanting to like break into and everything. So like when you're working with these institutions, like what are the outcomes that you're seeing for them and being able to kind of, diversify their program offerings with something like this?
Yeah, well, and again, so if you think about it, we actually didn't start telling schools what we were doing. We didn't start really marketing the schools until the early fall of 2019. And we went to all of the UPSIA conferences, and we had lots of people come by our booth and take selfies and laugh and walk away. And but so if you think about the fall of 19, it was, it was pretty normal times for the schools of continuing education. 2020 comes around and there's a pandemic, and universities are starting to look at the folks who had figured it out for working adults, for online, and they were also looking to these divisions of continuing and professional education to bring in revenue where they were losing it elsewhere. And so your point about, finding, being, on trend and having new programming, that was, was kind of a perfect storm for us because we had something completely new. And we had something that potentially could generate a lot of revenue and enrollments for the school, when they were all starting to really panic and look for that. And so, I mean, in 2019, I did have two signed contracts, both of which were taken back when the presidents told the board and the board told them no. So that was kind of a bummer. But finally, in January of 2020, our first university partner, Florida Atlantic University, took a chance, and it kind of grew from there pretty quickly. We had, by the end of 2020, we had 10 partners. So
Mm-hmm.
it was those who could navigate the concerns and were willing to take a chance with us that there wasn't going to be negative press, and really understood what we kept saying, which was this is not advocacy, this is education. This is a multi-billion dollar industry. It's the fastest growing job market in the country, and people need to understand it better. And when we really could get down to the people who were worried, and we showed them the curriculum and how serious it was and how rigorous it was and the expertise that we brought, we were able to start to get folks to jump on board.
Yeah, and that's great because again, it makes me think of because I just have had familiarity with this, and I did a certificate program in esports, and just sort of that similar like trajectory of growth and wanting folks to just kind of like know how it works. But then like in terms of like outcomes for institutions, like it just really helps, I think, to alleviate some of the pain of like kind of these institutions being irrelevant, like for a lot of people, if it's like, oh wow, well, like this is something I want to break into, and this is something that just really relevant to me, like so the institutions get that relevance, they get potentially just exposure to more students that
Yep.
they might have missed otherwise. And then yeah, I mean, because this is like the second part of my question is like the outcomes for the students, like they can get a credential that allows them to break in to an industry that I think sometimes otherwise it would just be like you got to like really only just like know the right people. Like it's just at such a point where like you know it's not mature to a point where there's just a lot of on ramps. So like this starts to you know get them get kind of the workforce development in the sector where it needs to be of like trained qualified people, but then just sort of makes it more accessible to a wider diversity of people because they can kind of have this credential in hand that sort of
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
translatable. Yeah.
Then 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, when I first started, I mean, it was the Wild West in the industry when it came to how you got experience or how you got education. It's not a whole lot better today. There are still no, the one thing we hear often from schools is, well, is there some required certification for someone to work here, work there, start this? And they're really still, some states are having some things, but they really still aren't. And so we also had to speak to the fact that it's the industry that told us this is what they were looking for when they hire people or when they were, dealing with patients. And so, yeah, schools had to consider the fact that they were going to be out in front of something and not following. And I think that was a big thing too. And again, we only talked to schools with one exception in states where it was at least medically legal, and they really wanted to get out in front of it. And for the students, there's multiple outcomes. Obviously getting a job, and having if you have a certificate from Syracuse University in the business of cannabis, you should have some credibility, even if there's no certification required, if you will, right? And so that helped. And then we also started working with Credly, and so we were able to offer digital credentials that are co-branded with the university and the Green Flower Institute, which is our kind of training arm, and so that's helping people show what they know also. But so that, yeah, people are getting jobs, or a lot of people are taking these programs. So what we do know is we've polled our students, at least 80% of everyone who takes any of our programs is trying to get into the industry. Then there's another, 10, 15% really that are in the industry and they're looking for upskilling. And then there are 5% that, that this is just, kind of interesting to them and they want to learn about it. They want to learn about the agriculture, the horticulture, or things like that. So we had to make sure that we had an idea of how they could be successful. We created an employer network based, with companies across the country that are part of our network who said they would be looking to hire people once they had these credentials. And that's been incredible and really great for the students to have access to. And we now have a partnership with careersincannabis.com, and our people who complete our programs get force ranked into the top 5% of search results by employers. So we've really tried to continue to build infrastructure to help the students be successful. But definitely the outcome is they want to be in the business. They want to start their own business. They want to get into management. I've seen a lot of students who were working behind the counter at a dispensary, but they wanted to be able to get into management, and a better understanding of the entire landscape of the industry would help them, and has. And then again, as I mentioned, on the healthcare side, we get a lot of doctors and nurses and therapists who take that program and hear back from them that they are much more now able to truly understand, when a patient comes in and says, well, I went to the dispensary and I got this chocolate bar and XYZ happened, or is it, you think that's better than what you prescribed me? And so helping doctors and nurses who only got 1 hour on the endocannabinoid system in med school and nursing school better understand it and relate to their patients is also a huge deal. And now we have a program in compliance and risk management, because every company, whether it's small or large, needs to have someone who can help keep them compliant and understand the risks now, because it's still federally illegal. So outcomes have been great for our students, and we know that it's been helping them exactly where they wanted to.
Yeah. Well, it's great to hear there's other applications as well, not just sort of like, working in a dispensary, which is like, for all intents and purposes, just kind of like, working at a store, like kind of, you have inventory that you're selling and that sort of thing. But like, there's obviously so many other contextual pieces of like, okay, why would a person go there? Like there's going to be obviously like the marketing and stuff, but like, yeah, likely they're going to get a recommendation from a medical professional or their therapist or those sort of things. So like that there can be a growing availability and just different permutations of uh, content that's sort of maintained and facilitated through subject matter experts and everything. It's just, kind of taking a lot of the best practices of what we've seen in, continuing and professional education and, trying to kind of, get a tiptoe around and thread the needle of, this sort of legal ambiguity and sort of the inconsistencies and stuff. So I appreciate you kind of speaking to that a little bit.
Absolutely.
And, certainly, recreational marijuana continues to be like ballot measures and things like that. So certainly I know you're just kind of growing your partnerships and everything, but just, as you're looking ahead, like what are you looking forward to in your work in the space? I don't know if there's things that are sort of, coming to fruition or, kind of changing that you're a little bit more kind of privy to kind of being in, in the thick of it.
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. First of all, every year new states go legal, which is really so. So in November, there were ballot measures that passed to go recreationally legal in Missouri and in Maryland, and so that opens up new markets. Which you have to remember about the cannabis industry, because it's not legal federally. You cannot grow cannabis and then produce a product and ship it to a dispensary in another state. Because the Interstate Commerce Clause exists in
Mm-hmm.
the federal law. So whenever you see a new state come on, whether it's they go medical for the first time or they go recreational, the job opportunities, the business opportunities are tremendous. And so we see that's a big future. Part of our future is we'll add schools in states as they become legal, and helping them. And I think that's definitely a big part. And as an industry, we also know that if it could ever become federally legal, that it would be a big boon as well. We would, I think it would get rid of a lot more of the stigma. And there are two sides to that. There's really kind of the banking laws, which are really difficult right now. If you're in the industry, you cannot put money you make in a cannabis business in a federally insured bank. And that is the same thing with interstate commerce and things like that. And so states are taxing and making hundreds of millions of dollars, and people are paying taxes, but the federal government doesn't have anything, it won't have anything to do with it. And so we keep a very close pulse on what's happening there. The descheduling of marijuana itself is probably the one thing that's the most difficult, because I think there's still people that think it's a gateway drug or things like that. So we keep a very close eye on that. We're hopeful that there'll be a banking bill, and then we have seen some movement federally on that. So on the legislative side, that's really important for us to kind of keep an eye out of what's happening and what we look forward to as we move forward. And then we're adding different programs as well. Just last year, in addition to the 4 programs we offered with university partners, we got feedback from industry leaders that one of their biggest problems was still getting people on the front line to know what they're doing when they walk in the door, and they were seeing turnover upwards of 40%. And what could we do to help with that? And so we created 3 additional programs, shorter programs, to help you train to kind of above entry level, but frontline working in a manufacturing setting, in a dispensary, and in a grow operation. And because we heard from them, they were getting too many people who would walk in the door at a dispensary and say, "Hey, I work at the Gap and I love to smoke weed, so I'm sure I'll be great here." And they fail miserably, because it's really, they're failing their, I mean, in a dispensary today, even a recreational dispensary, over half the people that walk in are over the age of 50, and they're not looking to get high. They're looking to solve for a problem. They don't sleep well, and they have chronic pain or inflammation, or they're dealing with cancer treatment, you name it. And having knowledgeable people behind the counter is really important. And in the manufacturing setting, no one really says that they worked at a place where they were extracting cannabis and infusing it into products and making products. So they needed training in that. And even on the cultivation side, you might have the best tomato plants in the world, but it's very different when you're cultivating for commercial purposes. So we saw that need, and we actually partner with community colleges in their workforce development departments to offer those programs. We've been doing that for a year, and now we have 15 community colleges offering those programs. And so we see growth in that area as well, as and we're talking about building a culinary program. People want to know how to infuse and make. I talked to a prospective student a couple of weeks ago who wanted to start a food truck in New York, and wondered if we had that kind of thing. And so we see expansion based on content and programming, on adding new schools and new states, and really kind of making sure that we continue to be the accepted experts in the industry when it comes to education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is an interesting point how, like, and this, I guess, is the case part for other things, like, that are sort of like, you have to get like a state license to do this, that, or the other, like,
Yeah.
where like each state needs to have kind of its own self-sufficient, sort of industry and stuff. Like, it's, yeah, I guess something I didn't really like think about fully, of just sort of the, like, major influx, as like, each state spins up their own kind of ecosystem and everything. Cause like, it's the same thing where if it's like, oh, each state needs to have like, a pool of licensed teachers to pull from, or whatever, like it's, I guess, kind of, mirroring that sort of thing. But yeah, so I think, yeah, just interesting and exciting times ahead, because it is one of those things where, like, what seems more possible is, like you said, like a banking regulation that like changes, where it's like, that is definitely not the most like sexy thing, but it's like a really important, just sort of like point of maturity and sort of acceptance that would likely change before just sort of like, okay, like, descheduling of marijuana, whatever. But yeah, I foresee probably that banking stuff will change in the next few years, just because like seeing stuff change where it's like, okay, finally, like Respect for Marriage Act and all that, it's like kind of late, but better late than never. So
and we are seeing, by the way, I talked about it still being the Wild West. We are seeing some states that are now looking to create some sort of requirement for in training. And so we have a two certifications that we have also that kind of come with those community college programs, a cannabis handler certificate. And that certificate, is something that we created, but it has now been, we just got it accredited from ANSI, ANSI, the standards, the U.S. In International Standards Board, which is the first time any cannabis curriculum has ever been accredited by ANSI, which is great. And so some states that are saying if you're going to be working in a manufacturing setting or a grow operation, you need to have some kind of handlers training. So we created the cannabis handlers training, and then the responsible vendor training is something you see in states for anyone on the retail side. And so we created a specific to the cannabis industry responsible vendor training certificate, and that comes with that program too when you learn to work in a dispensary. So we are hoping that those types of things will help move forward the conversation, and the fact that these are U.S. institutions offering these programs. We hope that will move the conversation towards some sort of standardization in the industry at some point.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, because I'm sure it's probably like an interesting thing for you, where like wondering if like since you have built it, then they are now like coming to it of less like, oh well, I guess we could have like a standard, credential for people work like, so it's like always like interesting things like that. Where I mean, obviously you're kind of like helping, to kind of blaze the trail here, and yeah, now at this point where. Because like it made me think where it's like, yeah, you gotta take like an exam to be like a bartender, like
Right.
so it's like there should be something, even just a modest, sort of just like, okay, here is just the bare minimum that everybody should know when they're doing this kind of stuff. Like, it's like food safety. Like this is like a
Yeah.
thing that people are putting in their body, like,
Yeah.
so that's
And that's
great that people are
exactly.
recognizing that. Yeah.
And all of those programs, kind of have like those health and safety, like almost like food safety regulations
Mm-hmm.
that they learn about too. So yeah, you're exactly right. And although I will tell you, when it comes to bartender, we have another division of our company that we started about a year and a half ago, kind of a sommelier certification for cannabis. It's called
Mm-hmm.
Ganjier. And it has taken off like wildfire. And people, it's a program where you have to go in person a couple times, but it's really rigorous. It was just covered on the Today Show a couple months ago, and so this idea that some point, I know Nevada has just made cannabis lounges legal, but whether you're working in a grow operation or in a retail area where people are actually partaking, this new kind of Ganjier certification is becoming very, very well respected and popular already.
Yeah. Well, and I worked for a few months this year just as kind of just like a life goal kind of thing. Like I love craft beer, so I get to work as a server at a tap room, and they were sort of like encouraging folks to do sort of the same thing of like it was like Cicerone beer
Yeah,
server
yeah,
training. So like there's like multiple levels. Like it got to that point where like you could get like the third level up of like going in person and doing stuff, but the very basic was just like if you're a beer server, you take this exam, you get to be a lot more knowledgeable about like flavor profiles and that sort of thing. So it's
yeah.
yeah, it's funny that there's which again makes sense that there's the parallel in the marijuana industry and everything. But because yeah, I mean it's all these things like just sort of points of maturity and just sort of like get all these sort of like accessible on ramps and just sort of different ways that people can work in the space and be yeah, just really well informed and creating great experiences for people. Because like you said, like a lot of people nowadays coming like you know wanting to solve a problem, so it's like okay, well I should be knowledgeable and not just be kind of like kind of I don't know spitballing, just gonna be like I don't know, try this, like go for it. It's like this I can guarantee should help you, and if like we need to like tinker with the dosage or so like whatever, but
100%.
yeah, so that's great.
Yeah.
um well, and we always like to, as we're winding down, kind of share resources. So, I mean, you've obviously spoken a lot about what Green Flower, your organization offers. So we'll definitely link out to those different kind of aspects of what you do. But any other things that you'd want to give kind of a tip of the hat to that we could include in the show notes?
Yeah, I'll tell you one of the challenges in the industry, and whenever we talk to a university, they're like, well, what are, how many job openings are there in the industry, and what are the, they're used to looking at Department of Labor and Statistics and getting data, right? Well, the Department of Labor and Statistics won't cover the cannabis industry because it's federal and it's not legal, and so a great organization was started a number of years ago called Leafly, Leafly, and they really are the folks that are monitoring the job industry and what it looks like, a number of jobs, and they do an annual report every year that comes out in March that really that gives people great data on everything from job opportunities to turnover to salaries and pay scale, and so they do a really great job. And I always suggest that people, if they really want to dive deep into what does this industry look like, I can sit here all day and tell you it's the fastest growing job market, but there's really great data. And but Leafly is the organization that I always think does the best job of that, and I recommend it. And then there are a number of kind of organizations that are out there and keeping track on legislation and on what's happening in new companies, and what's happening in investment. And I think one of the best ones is called Marijuana Moment, which is literally marijuanamoment.net, and they have a daily newsletter that comes out, but they do an incredible job of keeping up on what's happening in legislation in every single state, in legal states and states that are thinking about it. On the federal side, they do a really great job in keeping you informed of what's happening, and so I'm always a big fan of that, and I think it's a great place to get information. Obviously, our website, greenfloweredu.com, is where you can learn about all of our schools and all of our programs. But yeah, externally, I think Leafly and Marijuana Moment do the best jobs of really getting you good information, incredible information, when you're looking to learn more and more.
Perfect. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And then we will wrap up as we always do. If you want to share a final thought or call to action that you have on this topic to kind of finish everything off, yeah, just go ahead. The floor is
Well,
yours.
thanks. Well, first of all, thank you. We get a lot of recognition in the cannabis industry for what we do, and we're really, well respected and noted, and it's great. And in higher education, it's still, while we work currently with 19 universities and 15 community colleges, it's not always, in higher ed that people that are in the higher ed industry themselves really hear about us, and so it's really, we appreciate the fact that we can kind of get our story out. It's I will tell you, in the coming year, our biggest competition will not be another company like ours. It's universities that are starting to create their own programs, which I think is great. If we fill a need where you don't have such subject matter expertise or people who can teach, but for those who want to build that out, that just continues to add to the credibility, and the need for good quality, rigorous education in cannabis. And speaking of which, one other um, resource I might point out is UPSIA has done 2 white papers on the need for higher education in cannabis, and I think you can get it on the UPSIA site. Jim Fong did an incredible job, and so we're just excited to continue to get the word out within higher ed circles that this can be meaningful and helpful, and that we're happy to be the folks to help. And then the only thing I would say is that we all of our schools have 6 starts a year, and because they're 6-month programs, but they're made of 3 8-week courses.
Mm-hmm.
They're asynchronous, and so all of our schools will be offering a new start on January 9th, and then 8 weeks after that, 8 weeks after that. And so if you want more information about the program specifically, and you can see all the schools that offer the programs, you can go to that greenfloweredu.com, and you can learn about all of the programs and all the schools, and you can send in questions or set a time to talk to someone. We're there to help folks, but every school with whom we work is doing really, really well, and really filling a need in the industry and in their communities. We've just, we've had, nearly 3,000 students go through these programs, and we didn't launch our first one until July of 2020. So it's been fantastic, and things are only growing, and we've got more schools coming. So if you want to learn more about that, that's a great place to go.
Awesome. Yeah, and just kind of follow your continued milestones and accomplishments and exploits and everything. And yeah, I imagine the future is looking bright, and it is really cool just to see that like you're saying, there's like the kind of sommelier offering is something that's been really resonating as well, which I think that's super cool. So, well, yeah, I mean, thank you for jumping on and sharing all that you did. Just really appreciate your time and the work that you're doing to kind of normalize and sort of just bring kind of the best of sort of the ed tech and OPM worlds and stuff to this space and everything. And of course, we'll have ways to connect with you and Greenflower and everything that you mentioned in the show notes as usual. So yeah, just thanks again for your time and for hanging out for the show.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast.